Another day, another story. Sheikh Hasina did not want to resign as Bangladesh Prime Minister and wanted security forces to intensify the crackdown on nationwide protests, but security bosses said the protests cannot be contained by force, according to a report in Prothom Alo newspaper. The report details what went down in the Prime Minister's official residence before her last-minute escape in a military aircraft, shortly before hundreds of protesters stormed in and went on the rampage. According to the Prothom Alo report, the Awami League leader called the top officers of the security establishment and police force to her residence. Welcome to Tabo Eminent Channel. The death count was rising, and some of her advisors had tried to talk her into transferring the power to the army. But the 76-year-old five-time Prime Minister was adamant. She asked the forces to strengthen the curfew already in place. On the streets, however, the situation was changing fast. Despite the curfew, protesters had started gathering at various spots in Dhaka. At her meeting with the security bosses, she questioned why they had not been able to contain the protests. She pointed to visuals of protesters climbing atop police vehicles and asked why the forces were not cracking down harder. At one point, she reminded them that they had been elevated to these positions because she trusted them. During the meeting, Sheikh Hasina praised police's response to the protests. But the police chief conveyed that the situation is such that police won't be able to contain it for long. The security forces, the report says, tried to explain to her that more force is not the answer. But the veteran leader did not budge. Then the officers spoke to Sheikh Hasina's sister Rehana in another room and urged her to convince the Prime Minister to step down. Rehana spoke to Hasina, but that did not help. At this point, Sheikh Hasina's son Sajib Wais Joy stepped in. Based in the US, Joy spoke to his mother and managed to convince her to resign. Speaking to NDTV, Joy yesterday said his mother did not want to leave Bangladesh. She wanted to stay. She did not want to leave the country at all. But we kept insisting that it wasn't safe for her. We were concerned for her physical safety first, so we persuaded her to leave, he said. I spoke to her this morning. The situation in Bangladesh, as you can see, is anarchy. She is in good spirits, but she is very disappointed. It's very disheartening for her because it was her dream to turn Bangladesh into a developed country. She worked so hard for it over the last 15 years, keeping it safe from militants and as well as from terrorism, and in spite of all of that, this vocal minority, the opposition, the militants have now seized power, he said. The crowd of protesters was swelling, and intelligence input said Ganya Vorban, the Prime Minister's official residence, may be stormed. Sheikh Hasina was given 45 minutes to pack up. She wanted to record one last speech addressing the people of the country, but there was no time. Accompanied by sister Rehana, she left home. There was a short halt at Bangabhavan, the Bangladesh president's official residence, where she completed the resignation formalities. Around 2:30 p.m., the ousted leader took off in a military aircraft, bringing the curtain down on her 15-year uninterrupted term. Her ouster and flight also represents a massive shift in Bangladesh politics. 50 years after her father and Bangladesh's tallest leader Sheikh Mujibur Rahman led the struggle for the country's independence, Ms. Hasina was forced to flee as protesters vandalized her father's statues. The legacy of Mujibur Rahman, fondly known as Bangabandhu, is no longer a symbol of Bangladesh's war of liberation. Instead, it represents her daughter's politics that protesters claim focused on suppressing dissent. What led to this? The protests in Bangladesh, which began last month, started as an agitation against a quota system under which 30% of government jobs were reserved for family members of muqtiyadars, those who fought in Bangladesh's War of Independence in 1971. The protesters said this system favors supporters of the ruling Awami League and wanted a merit-based system to replace it. As the protests grew, the Awami League dispensation tried to crush it with an iron fist. And then, a remark by Hasina sparked fury. If not the grandchildren of the freedom fighters, then who will get quota benefits? The grandchildren of the Razakars? She asked. a paramilitary force recruited by the Pakistan Army during the 1971 Liberation War. Razakars carried out mass atrocities, including mass killings, rapes, and torture. Naturally, the remark touched a raw nerve. Reservation has been a burning issue in Bangladesh for years now. In 2018, an agitation on this issue forced the government to water down the reservation system and cancelled quotas for some positions. The latest unrest was sparked by a High Court order that declared illegal the 2018 government circular cancelling 30% quota for freedom fighters' descendants in government jobs. This order was scrapped by the country's Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ordered that 93% of government jobs must be allocated on merit and the remaining be reserved for relatives of freedom fighters. But even the top court's order could not pacify the protesters. Media professor Suman Rahman describes the chaos near the Prime Minister's official residence yesterday. He had brought his children there to see what's happening, he tells the BBC. There was a lot of vandalism and people leaving with things like pigeons, small trees, fish. It makes me think they were taken as souvenirs of their win. Nearby was the former residence of the PM's father Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, also founder of Our Nation. Protesters had burned it down totally, said Dr. Rahman, who lectures at the University of Liberal Arts Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina's resignation was not surprising but very frustrating, he said. She left her party and the entire country in a mess. Still, Dr. Rahman said he believes in the young generation of students in Bangladesh. I have been amazed to see how wise they are. So I am optimistic about the future of our country, he said. Indian government's position this morning. Bangladeshi publication Daily Sun cited unconfirmed sources as saying India has granted permission for an interim stay, during which Mrs. Hasina will get comprehensive logistical support. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been briefed on the Bangladesh situation, and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has spoken to leaders of all major political parties in the country. India's dilemma after Dhaka power shift, Sheikh Hasina's oust. The events in Bangladesh present a problem for India, particularly if the UK turns down Sheikh Hasina's asylum request. India also does not want to be seen as overtly backing the ousted leader because that may complicate the country's relationship with a new government in Bangladesh, whatever it may be. What next for Bangladesh? A new interim government, to be advised, most likely, by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, is believed to be taking shape in the crisis-hit country. This follows the release from jail, ordered by President Mohammad Shahabuddin, a former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia, who was convicted of corruption. Ex-PM, Nobel winner, student leader, key faces in new government. In speculation that has emerged, inevitably so, since Mrs. Hasina quit, 3 key names are at the forefront, 2 of whom are the army, which took charge after Mrs. Hasina quit, and which may have given her a 45-minute ultimatum, and her nemesis and former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia, who was jailed in 2018 on corruption charges and whose release was ordered by the president. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.